you guys are excited about teaching high school, about teaching middle school. You're going to find some challenges with that because right now in 2024, we have our latest data. So NAEP is called the National Assessment for Educational Progress. And that test is given every few years. And it's important because that's our only assessment point that is consistent nationwide. Like we have iLearn, iStep, that type of thing. So NAEP is the only nationwide assessment that we have. So the most recent data from last fall shows us that eighth graders, 70% of eighth graders are not reading on grade level. I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute. 70%. And that's, sorry guys, that's also the same data. They don't test every grade level. They test 4th, 8th, and 12th. For 4th, 8th, and 12th grade, it's all the same. It's all right around that 70% mark. So our nationwide data, just on average, 70% of our students are not reading on grade level. So if we translate that to your classroom, you're standing up in front of your class, 70% of the students sitting in front of you can't access the grade level text that you give them or that you assign them. And so this is shocking for a lot of our new teachers that go into the classroom ready to teach literature, ready to do research papers and essay writing, when you have so many students that are still working with decoding and fluency and have phonics needs. And they're like, I don't know how to help and support these students. But this is the harsh reality that we're dealing with right now in the classroom. And this is going to be a huge part of your position and role is how do I support my students when they can't access the grade level text? Here I am, I think I'm planning this lesson and we're going to dive into comprehension and writing, and they are not at that level. Depending on where you're at, I currently also work with Logansport school districts. Are you guys familiar with Logansport? Yeah, so they have 60% of their students are English language learners. And so that statistics is even higher for those students. So it really depends on where you're. For our minority groups or subpopulations, that statistics is closer to in the 80% of students not reading on grade level. And then it was really interesting. There was a study done last year where out of California, where in 2-parent households, where both parents or guardians are both college educated, we still had 49% of students not reading on grade level. And I think that's really important because it strips away a lot of the assumptions and stereotypes that we have about students who aren't reading. Students coming out of, what we would consider educated or stable households, still not reading on grade level. Initial thoughts to this information, initial reaction.
Well, it's definitely higher than I would have expected, for sure. I mean, I know that some of the practicum teachers I've talked to have kind of mentioned that is a little bit of, an issue, but I definitely wouldn't have guessed that it was 70% of eighth graders not on grade level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of discouraging because I mean, like you said, I was looking forward to jumping in, teaching literature, teaching all that stuff. So that's kind of discouraging to think that. But about the English language learners, my other major is Spanish, so that's actually kind of exciting for me because I would have more of an impact there if I am able to teach that.
Yeah, absolutely. That will definitely be an asset, just knowing a second language to help support your students, because there's so many crossovers between learning language and also teaching reading or trying to help students with reading skills. Yeah, and it's so true though, Jake, because we are excited to come into the classroom. Like that's why we become English teachers, right? Because we like aspects of literature, or that's what we are excited about. And then when we get there and we find, I've got to go way back. I've got to start way before I think I can. So just kind of framing it up. So that's what a K-12 looks like. So here's where we're at for college students needing remediation. So 65% of students entering community colleges need at least one remediation course. 25% of students entering a public four-year college need a remediation course. So those are even our on track for college students are needing support in reading. And then I mentioned I was assistant superintendent. One of the things we did annually is kindergarten roundup. So all the kindergartners from the community come out and we screen them. during the summer to get them ready and see where everybody's at when they come in for kindergarten. So in 2022, during our kindergarten roundup, 70% of the 4 and 5-year-olds that we screened were scoring at a 3-year-old maturation level, meaning that they're acting and developed as much as a 3-year-old. So again, they're coming in, and here we are as kindergarten teachers ready to teach the alphabet and numbers and letter formation, and they're more of a 3-year-old. Some of them are not potty trained. They're rolling down the hallway. So just, it kind of shows you that that's just not, in education, it's very common for high school teachers to say, if the middle school teachers just would have done XYZ. Middle school says, if the elementary teachers would have just done X, Y, and Z. What do elementary teachers blame? Parents. Exactly. Yep. And so regardless of who's at fault, this is what we have. So how do we support the students that we have? And so this whole conversation is, I'm trying to frame up that I want you to go in eyes wide open, thinking, being realistic about the students that you're getting and about where their developmental needs are and the skills that they're going to lack and the skills that they're going to have. So I just want us to be very practical and pragmatic and aware of where our students are. So if you guys had any special education courses,
Like an introductory kind of thing.
Real high level. So this is terminology that you're going to hear a lot. Tiered pyramid of instruction. You'll hear tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Does that ring a bell? Okay. So to kind of break it down, this is an important model because the whole public school system works off of this model. And it means that tier 1 is our first time general education or core instruction. 80% of our students should be ready for this. And then outside of those 80, we anticipate about 20% needing extra help. 15% will need the tier 2, which just means it's just a little bit extra help, maybe additional practice, maybe slower paced curriculum. And then tier 3 is intensive one-on-one. So these are students who might require their own personal paraprofessional or IA, or they have one-on-one tutoring throughout the day, and typically always identified as special education services. So this is the model that we work from, the theory, and we do our hiring practices based on this model. So I have to make sure as a school leader, I have enough teachers for tier 1. If I'm only supporting special education students that are about 10 to 15% of my population, that tells me how many special education teachers I need to hire, how many interventionists I need to hire. So this is what we base our hiring practices on and our scheduling on, is this model. This model was developed in the early 2000s. So according to this model, 20% of our students, we have the capacity structurally as a public school system to be able to support 20% of students with extra help. That's it, 20%. So our national averages, though, we typically have 20% of our students are special education students. So you can think of this through 2 lenses. You can think of it through a national average, or you can also think of it through your local school district. This is also reflective. So my local school district will typically have about 20% of their students being special education or needing special education services. 10% are English language learners and will need that support. And then roughly 7% will be identified as gifted and talented. And they also need extra support because they need enrichment opportunities. So it counts as this additional support. So that 37% is more than the 27 or the 20% that we've allotted. So what we're really working with is more of this diamond shape, where only 20% or so are ready for first-time instruction. So we're talking about 70% of our students not reading on grade level. We can't just come at them. If they're in 10th grade, we just can't come at them with 10th grade instruction and think everybody's going to be okay. And then the 20% of them will have to scaffold, slow down, help extra. That's not the way it is. That's not the reality that we're living in and working in. It's typically only 20% of students that you can give the grade level text, give first time instruction, and then they can, they're off and running and working independently. It's more of our tier 2 is the 60%. So we're slowing down curriculum, our pacing. We're providing extra practice, additional support, special steps just to outline everything because the majority of students need that. And there's a saying that says some students require this, but all learners benefit from it. So, and we'll talk about that a lot. So there might be just a small group of students that require decoding instruction, like need decoding support. But there are things that we can do to help support the students that can't decode that will benefit all learners, even if they're learning on grade level. And so while we're together this semester, I'm going to show you some of those strategies. And I don't want you to start sweating and be like, oh my God, I didn't sign up for this. I've got to switch my major. Like, I don't want you thinking like that. You're going to be prepared after we're finished with this class. So it doesn't matter if you have students in your class that are like working at the word level, trying to sound out words, or they're words that like they're reading choppy in their sentences. I'm going to help provide like solutions or strategies so that it doesn't matter what their reading level is. You feel equipped to be able to support them to read whatever text they have to read. And then our tier 3 is higher in that 10%. So that makes it tricky because we're working from an outdated model. And this is why school intervention periods, like we'll have one school reading interventionist or one interventionist, and she has maybe 45 minutes a day to help a group of students. Maybe she can have 20 kids in her schedule, but her list is like 300 that need support. So it doesn't work, the model that we have where, okay, kids that need help in the general classroom, it's this small portion, so we can take them and give them extra support in another space. Additional, we call it RTI, response to intervention, or this additional period where they can get more homework help. That doesn't work anymore because you have more students that need support than don't. And so it's this flipped upside down model. So we have to change our approach. And instead of teaching this small group of students with slowed curriculum and extra practice, that's how we should be teaching the large group of students in our first time instruction. So interested to see what you're thinking, what your action is.
Pretty pessimistic.
I'm sorry, not trying to kill the joy here. Yeah. What do you mean when you say pessimistic?
It's just kind of a bummer to think that students that need extra help, extra resource intensive help are the norm rather than the exception. And knowing that our schools are not equipped for that.
Yeah.
Just knowing that it's not a few students that are falling through the cracks, it's most of them. That's pretty disheartening.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's a tough pill to swallow. And it's hard for teachers, who are in the classroom because they're trying their best, and they feel like they're not being successful. Yeah. I think this quote is very apt and it's articulated well, so I'll just read it. So, in regards to special education, the National Institute of Health and Human Development referred to the learning disability category as a sociological sponge to wipe up the spills of general education. So meaning general education, the mainstream classroom isn't doing a great job. And so we're using special education services to kind of come in and help with all the extra stuff. And so that's why we have so many students in special education services. In fact, we would have 20%, okay, let me think about how to say this. 20% of our students that are labeled special education would not need services if they would have received good first-time instruction, like reading instruction at the primary level. We have tons of students that are in special education, not because they have any cognitive deficiencies, but because they didn't get good reading instruction when they were in K1, 2, especially because of COVID and all those little ones online. It's very hard to learn to read. So we're using special education. as part of that. And there's, the saying, you can say it like this: we can't intervene our way out of a tier 1 problem. So tier 1 has got to be where we do all of our best instruction. And so that's what we're really going to focus on this semester. Is we're still going to teach the canon. We're still going to teach literature. We're still going to do those things because that's what we're required to do. The kids may have changed. The standards have not. The 10th grade English standards are still the same. If anything, I feel like they're more rigorous than ever with the type of assessments that we have. We have students coming in lower, but we still have these high expectations. And so I want us to be able to know to still teach what is required, but have the skills to know how to kind of scaffold up our students so that they can get to grade level text. Because what we don't want to do is, and some teachers are doing this, they're taking their grade level text, they're popping it into AI and saying, make this text be at this lower level, at a 3rd grade level, and then it will spit it out. And then now they can understand it. Well, when they take a high school or middle school test, it's still going to be high school or middle school reading. So we can't just lower it and water it down. We have to give them the skills and help them to be able to access that text. So that's what we're going to work on. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or bummed out because we still teach the same things. We're just going to have to maybe do it in a little bit more of a specific way with some additional practices. So let me flip through here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So let's talk about some reading models. So you heard me say the science of reading. So the science of reading is terminology that is being used all over our country right now and in our state legislation even. And so it was just approved 2 years ago. And it was said that by this year, all schools in the state of Indiana, K-5, needed to have approved reading curriculum. Before, you could get whatever reading curriculum you wanted. You could make your own. You didn't have to have one. Now schools are required, because of these statistics of kids not learning to read, schools and states have taken kind of more control and reins. And they said, because we have 70% of kids not reading, we're taking a little bit more control. And you now have to have one of these listed approved curriculum that we've already decided that are approved and, good enough. They meet the right criteria. You have to be utilizing one of these. That's happened at K-5. It has not happened at 6-12 yet, but it could be coming. So just something to kind of note, especially that would be a big shift for secondary teachers who typically have open source curriculum, meaning they use whatever they want. They create their own, they find stuff from different sources. There's a lot of artistic freedom being at the secondary level as far as when it comes to curriculum. So that might be something that might be a little bit different too. Some schools, though, especially larger school corporations, tend to have curriculum already purchased, though, even for secondary. So just something to keep in mind. So the science of reading, this language, this is all kind of, balled together. And it's based on the scientific models of reading that I'm going to show you now. So this really, the first session that we're in together right now, this is going to be the only one where we're talking about science of reading stuff. We're going to refer back to it the rest of our sessions together. So it's kind of our foundational language that we're learning and going to reference together. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of basic type of reading things, but don't think, oh my God, what is this, a reading class? No, we're going to get there. I just want you to have some foundational. The real definition of reading is just making meaning from symbols. So you could see a little kid, 2 or 3 years old, see the golden arches and know what that means. Or the Chick-fil-A sign or the bluey symbol come up on TV and they know what that means. And that's reading. That's pre-reading because they see a symbol and they're making a connection with the meaning of it. So the science of reading is basically referring to a body of research that shows us what the best practices are for teaching reading. So based on our brain science, neurology, sociology, all these different ologies and studies, we have research across different fields. They've all been combined and we know what works, the best ways to teach reading for little kids to adults. We know what works for the brain. We know what helps them learn. It's not like a mystery. It's not like we're trying to guess or figure it out. No, we have scientific evidence and data that shows us this is how kids learn to read. This is how they remember information that they read. So this is really kind of the premise of what that term, the science of reading, is. One of the foundational models, reading models, is called Scarborough's reading rope. And this is a picture of that. So what it is, if you look at the right where all these braided threads come together, this is a picture of reading comprehension. So at the secondary level, this is a big focus for what you're teaching. In ELA, you are teaching reading comprehension. You are testing reading comprehension. And we approach it as a thing, like a one thing, this is reading comprehension. But it's not that way. So if we work to the left and we start unraveling these threads, we find everything that's listed on the left here. These are actually all the different components that are happening in a brain simultaneously that lead to reading comprehension. And so when we test children, a reading comprehension test should encompass all of these things so that we can see where their deficit is, and then that way we can fix it. But if we get tests, which this is how it is at the secondary level, we get one reading comprehension score. That does not help a teacher to know how to teach them better, because all of these are the components that go into making someone have reading comprehension or understand what they're reading. So if we break down these threads, this bottom strand here, the K2, that means these are the things we're learning in kindergarten, first, and second grade. And we are supposed to master in kindergarten, first, and second grade. And these are called the word recognition strands. And that encompasses phonological awareness, which basically means letters make sounds. So if you see an A, you know it makes, and it also makes A. So your letters make all the different sounds. Decoding, I think that's one that we're all familiar with, seeing a word and kind of breaking it down, sounding it out. That also includes spelling. And then sight words are like old school. Here's a flashcard. When you see the word, you automatically know it. So that's called automaticity in reading. So here's the word, I know it. So these are skills that we work on with little kids, and then they master them. And then we move up to this other strand. So this bottom strand is where we're learning to read. The top strand is where we're reading to learn. So we are learning things, and this is third grade all the way to adulthood. We are learning about background knowledge. So before we start teaching Anne Frank, we need to have some background knowledge of Nazi Germany and what that was like. Otherwise, we're not going to have the content knowledge in order to have comprehension, right? So we know how important that background knowledge piece is. That's critical. The second thread there is vocabulary. Students have to understand at least 90% of the words on a page to be able to understand it. So vocabulary is huge. Language structure, that refers to like sentence structure, complex sentences versus simple sentences. Verbal reasoning is everything like inference, when you're reading between the lines, that type of thing in a text. Figurative language, that refers to verbal reasoning. And then literacy knowledge is really understanding like print or how things are laid out on a page. So maybe text boxes, headings, features, cause and effect type writing versus problem solution writing. So these are the things that we work on with big kids. Where we're struggling right now is that many of our big kids still don't have these mastered. So not only are we teaching all of these language comprehension skills, we have to figure out how to also support some word recognition skills. So how do we help teach Anne Frank with students who are still trying to decode? What does that look like? So we're going to work on some things like that. The second reading model to note is called the simple view of reading. And this is where we take those two strands and we separate them and we put them in a multiplication equation. So here's our word recognition strands here, here's our language comprehension strands, and we put them in a multiplication equation. Why we do that is because, so I'll use my son as an example. He has dyslexia. I would give him a 0 for decoding, but he has great vocabulary, good background knowledge. I would give him a 1 in language comprehension. Well, 0 times 1 is still 0. So even though he might have great vocabulary skills or content knowledge or background knowledge, if he's not decoding or spelling well, that is going to impact his reading comprehension. Meaning, we cannot overcompensate with a strength in one if we still have a deficit in the other. You have to have strengths in both. And what happens is we test our students 6 through 12. We give them a reading comprehension test. They score low. And I don't know if I have the slide in here, but it's typically the languages like advanced or proficient, basic, below basic. And so we take our students and we might group them. Here's our below students. Here's our way below basic students. And then we try to help them that way and provide support. We're not going to see any type of growth with those students unless we decouple those two strands and really be able to diagnose where is their deficit. Is it in the language comprehension strands, or are they struggling with decoding? We might keep trying to support students with more vocabulary support or things like that, simple sentences. Maybe it's not that at all. Maybe they just aren't a fluent reader. And if you don't read fluently, or you read real monotone like a robot, that's going to impact your reading comprehension because you missed that a character was angry. You missed a lot of inferences. So fluency also impacts your comprehension. So there's all these things weaving in to reading comprehension, and that's so important. So I know it sounds like I'm giving a lecture on how to teach reading to little kids, but this is critical because we're teaching our literature, and if we need students to understand it, we have to understand that all these components are going into effect. And if they're not understanding it, we have to be able to identify where we need to support them. When I have my lessons, I need to make sure that I am supporting all these different things. Questions or thoughts? That's a lot of information. I want to make sure we're consolidating our information. So let's stop and chunk and think about it.
You said that we're going to kind of be referencing back to the science of reading all semester.
Yeah.
Okay. So I say I think I have kind of a base knowledge here, but still fuzzy on the details. But if we're going to come back to those, then obviously.
Yep. Yeah. So this really, just think of it as like an introduction. You're not going to have any of this terminology memorized. This is not about like you recreating this rope and knowing that in depth. This just is really about you having the awareness of all the different things that go into reading comprehension and kind of taking these into account. So when you're in your observation and you're seeing kids that are struggling with reading, try to note, okay, what are they struggling with? Are they moving their mouth while they read? That could be a decoding issue, or that just could be like an attention issue too. But those type of things, really looking at where do I think that issue is, because I need to know that issue if I'm going to be able to support them. Yeah. Jake, how about you?
I actually find it pretty helpful to look at it as like two separate strands, because I mean, you will see students in practicums, some will really struggle. And I think that I've never really thought about like which particular aspect of reading comprehension it is. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting to look at it that way, but it seems helpful to like maybe pinpoint a reasoning behind it.
Yeah, right. I mean, think about it. Think about all the English teachers that have been in the classroom, that are currently in the classroom. They see their students are not making improvements. They don't know how to help them. Like, this is what I do all day, is work with teachers and principals that are like, my kids aren't moving. I don't know how to help them. And it's typically because they're teaching all of these things at the top, but the skills that the kids are lacking are here at the bottom. And secondary teachers, we don't have those skills, right? We didn't learn this. And so that's where the big gap is. So that's really my goal this semester. Is we're still going to teach all the things that we have to teach for middle school and high school, but I want you to have kind of like a Swiss Army knife. I want you to have a few tools and tricks that, regardless of where a student is or what they need, we have somebody entering the waiting room. Regardless of where it is and what they need, that you'll be able to support them and help them. Hi, Julie. Thanks for joining us. Hi, you're muted.
Okay.
Hi.
I thought I was unmuting and I was muting.
Oh,
Hello,
no.
everyone.
Hi. Are you in Kokomo or are you from another campus?
I'm from IUN.
Okay, great. Great to have you. Glad you could join us. I know there was a scheduling conflict with another course. So glad you could make it. So we're just a little bit into our lecture. So we'll just pick up from where you are. But I am recording the session. And so you can catch up on anything that you missed.
Okay, because are you guys on Central or Eastern time zone?
We're Eastern.
I'm
Oh,
Central.
darn it.
And I was early, but I'm actually late.
No problem. That stinks. Yes. Yeah, we are Eastern. But that's okay. You'll have the recording for the first portion of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yep. So we're just jumping in and we're talking about really, Julie, our big takeaway right now is that 70% of our secondary students don't read on grade level. And so that's kind of what we're addressing. We're still responsible for teaching grade level standards, but how do we do that when 70% of the students in front of us can't access that text independently? And so we're just getting into it now. So if you think about it this way, the kids that are sitting in front of you that aren't reading on grade level, we can categorize them into 3 different groups. So kind of think of it this way. So one group are these non-decoders. So they are struggling decoding at the word level. So individual words, they see it and they might see the word crash, but say the word crush because they're just looking at the word. They're looking at the word level versus as fluent readers, adult readers like we are, we can read 4 or 5 words at a time. Our eyes kind of scan and we read multiple words at a time. And we're not putting effort into the individual word level to where these students are. So these are the non-decoders. They can't decode. They're working to sound out each individual word. The only way that we can help support these students, these are the students that need that pull out extra support. So whether that's special education or if they're English language learners, or if they have like an RTI or a special, sometimes they call it what I need period, to get some extra support. These are the students who need that extra support because they're not going to get it in your classroom. The second group of students, and to use kind of a metaphor, they're like stuck in the driveway. They can't even like get out, to start trying to read. The second group of students we call disfluent. So we know there's fluency or fluent reading and there's disfluent. So disfluent readers read real choppy. So they're like, kind of robot reading, or disfluent can even mean monotone. So I just read everything's really flat and there's no emotion. And if I read that way, that's going to impact my reading comprehension. I'm going to miss a lot of inferencing and what the characters were doing and thinking. The good news is if you have students in your classroom that are disfluent readers, that is an easy fix. That, my friend, is a time issue, a time and practice. They don't have enough time practicing reading out loud. So there's things we can do in our class just to give them more time where we're going to practice reading out loud. And these are some of the strategies that we're going to work on this semester. The research is real clear on repeated readings. The more you read things, the more you understand them, the more deeply. And that just makes sense, right? I don't know why we have to have all these research studies that show us the more we read something, we're going to get it, the more we get it. But the research is there. And so we're going to work on some different strategies of just practicing. Because think about it, if you're not getting enough practice when you're a little guy, and everybody else is getting more practice than you and they become better and better readers and you're still here. And that's where that achievement gap comes. Everybody else is moving on ahead of you. And it's not that you have a cognitive deficiency or delay. You just need more practice. And some students do. Some students just need more practice than others. So that is our disfluent or our gear grinding students. Our third category, which you will have the most of in your classroom, are the non-comprehenders. So these students may read beautifully or read smoothly so they can decode, they can, they're pretty fluent, but you ask them, do a retell, like tell me what you just read or summarize what you just read. They can't do it. So they may have read it, but they did not get it. They did not understand it. And a lot of this is just teaching a strategy. We need to teach kids how to read different things. Like when you're reading your college textbook, you don't read it the same way you read Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter, you can just kind of let your mind go and it's in gear and you can enjoy it. When you're reading a textbook, if you're reading a chemistry textbook, you have to have a strategy for that. Or you're going to read that same paragraph like 3 times and not pay attention to it, or just read it and not understand it. And what kids do is they might be a good fiction reader, and then they get into social studies and they're trying to read, a high school social studies text or an econ text. And they just think, I can't do it. I'm not good at social studies. I just suck at science because I don't know how to read this, because they're trying to read it the same way they read Harry Potter. And you have to have a different strategy. And so that's where you come in with teaching some different strategies that we're going to learn together of how to support them when they're reading that. So thoughts on that. Let's chunk that out. So what are we thinking about the 3 groups, and does that feel a little bit better about how to help those students, knowing that we're at least I'm going to figure out some different strategies to be able to help them? Any thoughts?
Well, like you're saying, the more they read, the better they become. And hopefully comprehension goes along with that as well.
Right. Oh, we have another person joining us. I bet it was a Central Time also, maybe.
Probably. Yep, because it's 5:01 Central.
Hi, Carissa. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, nice. Are you guys on Central Time?
Yes.
Okay, so that was so we're on Eastern Time. So we've already been going for an hour. So I'm so sorry that there was a mix up with that time. So this is being recorded though. So I'll share the recording with you so that you can have that first part of the lecture.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And so who all is in the room there?
Pamela Wilson.
I'm Nathan Mayersky.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Chris Moore.
Okay, great. Glad you guys could make it. Yeah, and sorry about the time difference. Yeah, so we are just kind of diving in, guys. We've been talking about the science of reading, and you can get caught up on that on the video, went over some of the Canvas stuff. Once we get through the lecture, I'll let Jacob and Jake go, since they've already heard it, and I'll stay on with you guys, and we'll just kind of go through the Canvas course and how to navigate, and we'll talk about your field observation and things like that. Does that sound good? Okay. Okay, so for our group that just came in, we were talking about 70% of secondary students aren't reading on grade level. So how do we support them when we're teaching our grade level standards if 70% of our students can't access grade level text? So that's our recap. So I'm going to go back to this. So, and guys that just came in, this might be a little confusing. I'm sorry, Jake and Jacob. I'm going to back up just for 2 minutes and give them a quick overview of the rope, just so the rest makes sense for them. New folks joining us, are we familiar have we heard of Scarborough's reading rope? Anything about? Okay, totally fine. So this is, if you've heard of the term, the science of reading, it's basically a reading research base of the best ways that science tells us the brain learns and that we should teach reading. So this model shows us reading comprehension on the right and where all those strings come together, and we teach reading comprehension as one thing, but actually it's all these things on the left happening simultaneously in a brain that leads to reading comprehension. And so the things here at the bottom are for little kids, what we teach little kids, and the things at the top are what we teach big kids. But right now we have a lot of big kids that don't know the things that little kids know. And so that's what we're talking about, is how do we support kids that are lacking some of these skills? And we can't just teach and test reading comprehension as one thing. We have to know where their skill development is in each one of these factors. That's kind of the 2-second overview. And then, so when we have an assessment, we have to have an assessment that decouples both of those big strands. So word recognition and language comprehension. We should also have any type of writing assessment. Think about the last writing assessment that you've seen or given or taken. If we're giving a writing assessment to students, not only do we just test like their essay development or format, a thorough writing assessment should include all these different components, or this is what we should be assessing on. Because we can't just get one writing grade. We have to dig down. All of these different components will lead to their writing ability. And that goes, I know everything right now is like typing and we're keyboarding. Very rarely do we see handwritten text. But if we're giving an authentic writing assessment, it actually should be handwritten, because that uncovers a lot of information for the teacher about where the student's writing development and even reading development is. So spelling fluency, and I know a lot of times we don't even take spelling into account, but we're going to talk about that a lot this semester, and looking at mechanics, vocab, syntax, or sentence structure, and then our ability to write paragraphs also. So when we're assessing for writing, these are like the components that we're really looking at. So what we're going to do now, I want to talk about, we talked about the 3 types of non-readers. So we have the non-decoders, students working at the individual word level. We have our disfluent students who are reading kind of choppy. And then we have our non-comprehenders. So they can read, but they don't understand what they read. So we're going to take those 3 groups and we're going to attach them to Scarborough's rope, those bottom 3 strands. And so we're going to pull out one thread at a time and look at it. So kids, one of the things that anybody needs to be able to have reading comprehension, you cannot have reading comprehension if you don't have phonological awareness, which means a letter makes a sound. So I want to look at a few things for our kids in our classroom. Even if we're teaching middle and high school, we're going to have students that can't decode. So what does that look like? How do we support them in a middle and high school classroom? And I get a lot of pushback sometimes from high school teachers, especially saying, I don't have time to do these things because I have to teach my standards, and my standards are reading comprehension and they're writing, writing at a higher level. I hear you, but if a student cannot decode a word, what good does it do to teach them essay writing or to read Chaucer? We have to be able to scaffold students up to where that need is. We can't circumvent these basic foundational reading skills if they don't have them. So this is really important. But the good news with that is there are little activities that we can do in our classroom so this is kind of the infomercial for 5 minutes a day for 12 weeks. That's what the research shows. 5 minutes a day for 12 weeks. If you do phonological awareness activities with your students, these will benefit your English language learners, and these will benefit your non-decoders. And there are things that, these students require, but these practices are good for all readers because it's going to help their language skills. So one of the things that I encourage teachers to do, is to change the way that we frame things when we're working with students, right? What we know about adolescence, what's the number one barrier with adolescent learning? Engagement, attitude, apathy, right? We have to get them to buy into what we're selling. And if they feel stupid, they're not going to buy into that. So if you put a student in a remediation room or a special education pullout room, they know why they're there. They're not excited about being there. In your adolescence, you're really developing your self-identity as a learner. So they don't want to identify that. So that's why you get the hood up, the arms crossed, the push back, because they don't want to see themselves or they don't want to identify as that. One of the things we can do is just change our semantics. So instead of doing we're doing reading foundations, or we're doing, reading remediation, or it's reading lab time, that one's used a lot also. We can change the word to linguistics. Linguistics is the study of language. It's the fastest growing major in our country right now because of AI, and AI is built on language models. So we can say, hey guys, we're doing college and career readiness. You might be interested in one of the fastest growing majors right now called linguistics. So we're going to do a couple of linguistic activities every day and kind of warm up. This is going to be like our bell ringer, or this is how kind of warm up activities we're going to do. Some students require this, but all students will benefit from this. So we're going to do a couple activities. I'm going to model for you what it looks like. But when we talk about linguistics, we can think of it, these are the components. And so think of it like a metaphor for a brick wall. So at the top, what are we teaching as secondary teachers? We are teaching writing and we are teaching reading comprehension. 70% of our kids can't do these things. So we have to work backwards. If they don't have writing or comprehension, are they lacking fluency? If they're lacking fluency, what are they working at the sentence level? Check the sentence level. Are they working at the word level? Are they working at the syllable level? And then onset and rhyme is like the beginning and end of a word, like when you're decoding or blending a word together. That's what onset and rhyme is. The beginning of any language is sound. Anybody speak multiple languages or even not well? Like maybe took high school Spanish. Anybody a multiple language learner? Jacob, you said you're a Spanish minor or Spanish major?
Yeah, I'm double majoring in Spanish.
Okay, nice. Anybody else multiple language learner?
Oh, I took Spanish in high school, but I'm not
Okay.
really good at it.
Hey, that's okay. That counts. You'll get this. So any kind of, hey, I'm 85 days on Duolingo, got a streak going. Okay. So any type of language learning, you will know that sound is the first layer of any language. You have to be able to tune your ear into the sound of the dialect. Like Spanish, I can read Spanish really well, but when I hear a native speaker speaking it, it's too fast. I can't distinguish the individual sounds that are in the language. So one of the things that is really interesting to note is there's something called perceptual narrowing. It's a linguistic concept. So a baby's brain is like a sponge for all languages up until about 6 months old. Between 6 months and 1 year, if they haven't heard a language and their brain like diminishes the need or the capacity or ability to learn that language. So you always hear like it's easier for students or that are younger or kids that are young to acquire languages. That's true. Your brain is like a sponge for all languages. I was raised by 2 Hoosiers who can't trill their R's. So guess what? It impacts your dialect. My brain, after 1 year, you drop that need for it. If you're exposed as an infant to multiple languages, that way you can pick them up and yet you won't have an accent or dialect. If you learn a language older, especially after puberty, you will always have an accent. Even if you work with a dialect coach, you can get really close to perfection, but you will always have an accent. Long story short, sound, the ability for your brain and ear to tune into sound is the first level of learning a language. If you do not have an ear that's tuned into sound, you will never be able to write an essay or you will never have reading comprehension. This is where everything starts. It's the bottom layer. So one thing to kind of think about, trying to find where I want to go with this. So any questions or comments? Okay. So, we hear about phonics. So phonics, just kind of a basic overview because we're not reading majors. So I just want to give us at least the premise to understand the very basic things. Phonological awareness just means we're listening to sounds, and it has to do with sounds and not even any print. Just a letter makes a sound. And then typically there are students that have this need in their IEP, but it very rarely gets addressed. So when you're looking at your students and their IEPs, that's something to keep in mind, that you might have a deficit in there. And that's just the linguistic narrowing that I mentioned. So the difference between a good reader and a bad reader is the ability to identify, manipulate, and remember strings of speech sounds. That accounts for a significant portion of the difference between good and bad readers. So just comes back to this individual sound layer of words. Think about our spelling. We write and spell like how we hear, if we hear something. So, for example, one of the most common ways for kids to spell the word dragon is J-R-A-G-U-N, dragon, because they write things like they hear it. And so being able to tune your ear in. So one of the things that we have to do also is to teach vowels and all of the vowel spellings. So for example, this gets really tricky for our learners. Here's 6 of the long 8 different ways to spell the long A sound. So Daisy weighed in on Thursday to make great strides in horse racing history. And this is why students will say that English is really difficult or confusing and it doesn't make sense. And typically it's because we teach the alphabet is 26 letters. And so we teach those 26 letters and sounds. Actually, the alphabet is 26 letters, but it has 44 sounds. Of those 44 sounds, they can be spelled 75 ways. And so if we teach the 44 sounds and the 75 spellings, that unlocks a lot of mystery of the language. So we don't just teach that A makes A, we teach that A can be spelled all these different ways. That's very difficult for language learners that come from Spanish, where they have like a transparent language or every letter makes one sound. English is called an opaque language. So one letter can make multiple sounds and be made and spelled multiple different ways. So let me skip over a little bit of this. So I want to do a couple of those activities. So what do those linguistic activities look like that I could do with my classroom to like our warm up? What's our linguistic activity look like? And so here's what it looks like. So feel free to mute yourselves because of like the Zoom has a little bit of a delay. So I'll model it for you, but I do want you to say it out loud. Okay. You can mute yourself, but please play along. So I'm going to say the word, and then we're going to count the number of phonemes, which is the linguistical term for sounds. So if the word is ice, I'm going to say the word ice, and then I'm going to count the sounds. Ice, 2 sounds in ice. So say ice, ice, and now 2 sounds. Ice, 2 sounds in ice. So now sigh, everyone say sigh, sigh, 2 sounds, 2 sounds in sigh. So now let's figure out how many sounds are in the word day. Duh, a, 2 sounds. Now how about the word aid? A, duh, 2 sounds. Choose, ch, oo, s, 3 sounds in choose. And what about quake? K, w, a, 4 sounds. Okay, so that seems pretty easy at the beginning, but if you do this just kind of 5 minutes a day, this type of activity, this will help close that gap for your multi-language learners and for students that are those non-decoders. This is the 5 minutes a day, 12 weeks work. This can close the gap. It's just giving them practice. They didn't get it when they were young, or they didn't get enough of it, or they're new to our country and to our language. This can close that gap. And it seems really juvenile and easy, but I tell you, it is not. I do this work with adults all day long, and they will get the word quake wrong a lot of times and say that there's 3 sounds. So it's really tricky to like really tune your ear into that. So we're going to do another activity, and it's a little bit tougher. Same thing you would do with your students, this type of work. And they struggle with it the first week or 2, but then you'll see they start picking it up and they get really good at it by week 3 and 4. So if we do this, it's called deletion, because we're saying a word and we're deleting one of the sounds in the word. So again, play along. Say peas without the p, ease, right? Say sheet without the t, she. Say stop without the s, top. Say wild without the d, while. Okay, great. So that's deletion. That is tough for students that lack this ability. So the last one we'll do, it's called manipulation, because we're taking the sounds and then we're swapping them or changing them around. So I'm going to say the sounds in the word teach, t, e, ch. And then I'm going to reverse them and put them backwards. Ch, e, t, cheat. So it has nothing to do with spelling. It only has to do with what I'm hearing. So the word cuts, k, 4 sounds backwards, t, k, stuck. So pitch, p, ch, backwards, 3 sounds. So that type of activity, you're done. You're done for the day. And that little activity will help those students and support those students. And it sounds very basic, but if you're the only high school or middle school teacher in your building with this information, then that kind of makes you responsible. There are a lot of secondary special education teachers that know this information, but they might work with a handful of students. Not all of your students that have this need are identified as special education students or are identified as SPED. We just did a huge assessment. There were 29 students reading at the 1st grade level that in 7th grade that were not labeled as special education and that were not labeled as English language learners. 29. So there are students in your general education classroom that need this support. So try this one on your own, and you can just jot it down or just try to count the number of phonemes, just say them out loud and see how you do, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, want to check our work? Okay, so pitched, H, g. 4 sounds and pitched. H, 2 sounds in her. Measure. J, 4 sounds. Oi, oi. Oi is called a gliding sound, so it kind of goes from an O to an I sound. Soothe, s, 3 sounds. Shout, show, 3 sounds. So maybe you got those all right. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you weren't sure. That's okay. It can be tougher than it looks. And then we can do it. We won't go through this one, but the same way after you've done it for a few weeks with your students, you can ratchet up the complexity a little bit and be like, okay, let's say the sounds, but what's the third sound? So then you have to identify the third sound. So it just adds a little bit of challenge to it once they start getting good at it and they really enjoy it. So, okay, how can I include phonological activities into my regular classwork? One of the easiest ways to do this, okay, 1 is bell ringers. 2 is you just include it into your vocabulary instruction. Everybody teaches vocabulary. Doesn't matter what unit you're teaching, what text you're teaching, you're going to have vocabulary instruction. This is one of the easiest ways to integrate it. So when you teach the word, you're going to teach the word explicitly. That means I'm going to explain it. Don't ever give, this is my only preachy statement. Don't ever give students a list of vocabulary words and then say, here they are, or display them. Now go find the definitions and then think you've taught vocabulary. That is not how it works. And I know that's probably how most of us were given vocabulary as students ourselves. Here's the list, go find the answer to the word. Explicit instruction means we give the instruction. The teacher explains the word. So I'm going to use the word erosion for an example. So if I'm teaching you and you're my class, even if you're high schoolers, I'm going to say erosion is our new word. What's the word? Erosion. We all say it. We all pronounce it 2 or 3 times because it helps. If we can hear all those sounds, we're going to spell it and retain it better. So if you think of vocabulary, and I think we are going to talk about vocabulary more in depth next week, but we want to manipulate and practice and play with the word multiple times in order to retain it. So we say the word erosion and then we break it down by syllable. Let's say erosion, erosion. We all say it together. Now we're going to break it out by sounds or phonemes, which is what we just did in those last activities. E, o, j. I'm pulling out all the sounds that is supporting your non-decoding students without having to do anything special just for them. You don't have to pull them out in a group and do special activities. You just hit it full group. And then this is called morpheme mapping, where you're helping students understand that different parts, morphemes or parts of a word, build a word. A lot of them will see erosion and think that's erosion. It's one word. It has one meaning. But morphemes or word parts make up a word. So E means out or away from, rod or row comes from rod, which means to gnaw, and jeune is the act of, and you map it backwards. You say it's the act of gnawing away, and that's the definition of it. So that's what vocabulary instruction looks like, and you integrate those phonological awareness activities for your students who don't decode. It's the easiest way to do it is just stop, call out the word, say it together, break it out in syllables, and try to break it out in sounds. If you're not comfortable and you're like, I'm not sure if I'm doing it right, anything is better than nothing. Even if you just do the syllables or try to bring out the sounds, whatever you do is going to be better than just saying, here's the list, go find it. But give them that practice. Okay, so let's chunk this information. So part of, teaching and learning is we just learned a bunch. So let's stop and consolidate it. And that will help us to remember it. So just of what we've talked about so far, what's new information that's important that you want to remember? And maybe you have an action item, or if there's anything that you want to share. Any of those, feel free to respond to all or one, but I would like a response. So what are you thinking? Just what's your first reaction? What's new information?
I would have to say when you said use linguistics instead of reading lab, because that's what they're used to hearing. And like you said, when you hear those words, reading lab, that's kind of like a pull out word. That means that you're in a special group or some type of special surrounding. So it makes you seem like you're less than, you might say. So I took that away.
Absolutely. Good. I'm glad. It is. It makes a difference. Makes a difference with them wanting to be there and what's age appropriate. You know, so much of the time, if a kid drove to school today and you give them something that's like cat in the hat to read to practice or put them in a reading lab, they're going to seriously have a problem with it. Do you think they're going to learn their best while they're in that situation? Absolutely not. Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Anybody else? What was takeaway or something that struck you? What are you thinking?
For me, it was the vocab instruction example that you just gave at the end. I really liked that a lot. I work with seventh graders and I'm just a resource para, and a lot of times they do give the vocab word with just the definition. Occasionally they spend time breaking it down like that. But I think that it would be much easier for the students if they learn to break it down like that, because then sometimes they can form their own definition, knowing some of those morphemes without actually knowing the word or the definition.
Right. Yeah. And even if they don't have those, those memorized, you as the
Right.
teacher provide all this. You can leave those bottom two blank and ask them, do the rest together and map it out together. Yeah. And have them fill out those bottom rows. Yeah. Thanks, Pamela. Anybody else? Okay. Help me move on. Where's the time? How much time do we have left, guys? What's our time at? I don't have to close my screen.
30 minutes,
We have 30 minutes?
I think.
It's 6:30 right now, so for
Okay.
you guys.
Okay. All right. So let's hit a little bit of decoding. This is what I mentioned earlier. Decoding's tough in English because we have 26 letters, 44 sounds, and there's 75 different ways to spell them. Something about kind of going along with that terminology that I've been using, the science of reading, one of those big points or takeaways is that the human brain was designed for language, like evolutionary. We are designed for language. Our brain is not designed for reading. Reading is, compared to evolution, it is a recent invention. So if I dropped you off in Italy, you would eventually pick up some Italian. If I locked you in a library and I came back in 6 months, you will not have picked up learning to read. It is a code that has to be explicitly taught and understood. So here's kind of one way to look at it. These are depictions of what an MRI looks like for a brain between a struggling reader and a strong reader. So the strong reader has all these multiple little points, and it creates like kind of this fast highway system that's really efficient. And those points are, I see a letter, what makes a sound, that sound connects to a word, the word connects to a meaning, the meaning connects to an experience or a picture. And so it kind of creates this sound. So when we teach reading, that's how we should teach it. So like phonics and decoding, here's a letter, here's how it's spelled, here's the word, that type of thing. The struggling reader brain, this large red space on your brain, this is what is working really hard. This is the part of the brain that was designed for recognizing your mother's face, for babies to recognize their mother's face. So then that's been shifted into recognizing images. If you're using like a whole language approach, or if you were taught, here's the word, memorize the word. Think about it this way. So if I line 100 people up in front of you, and I say go left to right, and everyone you see say their first name. So see their face, say their name. 100 people. Okay, think about, that could be from any time in your past. Think about the mental energy and the exhaustion of going through seeing a face and recognizing that and saying it. That's what a reader's brain is doing. That's using a struggling reader that's using this part of their brain. You can translate that to words on a page. They're looking at each individual word and they're seeing it as an image. And that's why they might see crash and say crush, because they're looking at the image of the word, not at the breakdown of the phonemes or the sounds. So you might have a student that just wants to get, tired. Reading is laborious. They don't have reading stamina. It could be just because they need more practice, or it could be because they're utilizing this wrong part of their brain, or they were taught reading in a different way. So that's the strong reading brain. So I'm going to hit spelling later, and coding is the fancy way for spelling. So I'm going to hit that later. Let me see what else we need to cover today. And I think that's probably going to be it. That was a lot for our first session. Email me if you have any questions.